You should have called me.
Well, I could have texted you and said, hey, you should come up to your panel.
I had no idea. I literally thought this was somebody else's panel. I'm like, oh, let's go fuck somebody's panel. That'd be really fun. And it was, oh, sorry.
Guys, let's hear it for Greg Nicotero. Loud!
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming and sweating and loving horror stuff like we all do.
Yes. See, Greg has probably the most storied history with George and the zombie genre as a whole. Greg, there's not much more you could do in the zombie subgenre than
No, I came up with a new idea.
Did you?
So we just finished shooting season 4 of Creepshow.
Yeah, baby.
And there's one episode I'm going to tell you guys about because it makes me so happy. So, George loved 3D stuff. George was a big, wanted to do a 3D movie. I think he wanted to do Creature from Black Lagoon in 3D at one point.
Yes.
So we came up with an idea called George Romero in 3D, and it's about these two people named Martin and Don, who are working in a bookstore, and they find a crate under the stairs, and they open it, and it's got old comic books in it that George developed, and they were 3D.
Oh, wow.
So the kid pulls out the 3D glasses and puts the glasses on, and there's a zombie on the cover. And unbeknownst to everybody, the zombie comes off of the cover and is now walking around the store. But you can only see it if you have the 3D glasses on. So invisible zombies. So they walk around the corner and there's a guy in midair, blood, and he's being held up by some invisible force, and the kid puts the glasses on and it's like, holy crap. So we did an invisible zombie episode.
Oh, that's amazing.
Of Creepshow. So there you go. And you're like, yeah, I've seen it all with zombies. I'm like, no, I came up with another idea. Invisible zombies.
That's awesome.
And by the way, I unleashed a bunch of them downstairs. When you hear screaming and people flailing, invisible zombies.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Just say no.
The new pandemic.
Yeah, really.
That's how it's
Please,
started.
we've had enough.
Invisible zombies.
A complete enough. So, why don't we, before we open it up to questions, because how many people got questions? I'm sure it's a lot, right?
Who doesn't?
Okay. So,
Yeah, how about who doesn't have questions?
who doesn't have a question? You can leave now. Only kidding. Anyway, so tell us about how you got started real quick, and then we'll open it up and talk about whatever anybody wants to talk to.
Okay, so I started the same way all of you did. I watched horror movies when I was growing up. VCRs just came about when I was probably 12 or 13 years old. So the real challenge was, when you were a horror fan at my age, and some of these older folks know, you had to work at it. You had to find that one screening of Horror of Dracula. You'd get your TV guide and you'd circle it. If it was on at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday morning, then you were literally throwing cold water on your face at 2 a.m. to stay awake because you didn't have the opportunity to see it again. So that level of commitment of I have to stay up and, reading Famous Monsters magazine, which was the only magazine until '79 when Fangoria came out. So to be a horror fan, you had to really work at it. And I really believe that that's what bonded everyone, Quentin and Guillermo del Toro, and even people like Tom Hanks who loved Ray Harryhausen.
Monster kids.
All these monster kids, we all had that same upbringing. If you wanted it, you had to fight for it. So the fact that now we get to celebrate it at these conventions and you can look on your phone in 30 seconds and find it, it does take some of the fun out of it because it's so easily accessible, but it creates this world where everybody can really can embrace it. So that's kind of how I got into it. I loved horror movies, and I grew up in Pittsburgh, the mecca of the horror movie at the time, and
Chili
met
Billy.
Bill Cardille. I have a Chiller Theater shirt that I made. Literally, it was like an ad from the TV Guide. So, my uncle also was an actor and knew George, and my uncle was cast in The Crazies as Deputy Slade, I think he gave himself a name, because a lot of extras in movies go, no, they give themselves characters and backstories. Anyway, so when I met George finally, I said, oh, my uncle Sam, you know my uncle. And that's how George was like, oh, you should come down to the office and visit. So I would, as soon as I got my driver's license, I would drive down 247 Fort Pitt Boulevard in Pittsburgh, and I would visit. And then Creepshow came about in 1980, I think they shot, summer of 1980, and he said, hey, you want a job as a production assistant? I'm like, I'm getting ready to go away to college, but thanks, but if you want to visit, come visit. So I visited the set of Creepshow a lot. Cut to 4 years later, I go down to have lunch with George, and he said, hey, we just got a green light on Day of the Dead. And I went, and he said, do you want a job? And I'm like, hold that thought. So I drove home, got a speeding ticket on the way home, told my parents, I'm like, hey, I'm gonna take a semester off of college, and I'm gonna go work on this movie. And I still have, my dorm room probably still has all my shit in it. I don't even remember if I took anything. I'm just like, bye.
Well, that's just it. When George says, hey, you want to come do something, you don't waste time.
No,
like,
and
I'm slingshotting myself there if I have to be.
And the funny thing about it with George was he always felt bad.
Yeah.
Like, I think he felt like he steered me wrong. Like, this is Greg Nicotero. He really should have been a doctor. Finally, I said, George, it's been 20 years. You can drop the I should have been a doctor thing. I think I'm doing okay. So, thanks.
You do have a doctor name.
What's that?
I do have a doctor.
Well, my dad's a doctor. So, if you got kidney problems, Dr. Nicotero. So, it's kind of, makes sense.
All right, let's open it up to the crowd. Who has a question?
I saw one hand up way back there real quick.
Oh, man. Gotta do the thing, man.
Woo, thanks.
You like Iron Maiden?
Yes. That was the question?
That was the best damn question ever.
Great. All right, but wait, do you like Iron Maiden?
I've never been.
All right. I was waiting for you. Nah, I just wanted to see if you liked them.
Next
All right.
question, maybe non-Iron Maiden related or Iron Maiden
Wait,
related.
there are Iron Maiden questions or non-related?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes.
Yeah, my dad's a doctor. Next question.
Next question.
Okay, so you're talking about the idea of the invisible zombies. What I love about it also sort of pays an homage to a combination of From Beyond meets like a zombie movie meets They Live.
Yeah, actually, I hadn't thought of the They Live connection, but I just was really excited about it. Of course, the funny thing is the network's like, yeah, we hate this idea. So I'm like, great, I'm doing it. I'm the worst.
Screw them.
I'm the worst, because if somebody tells me, like, I just directed an episode that I absolutely love. James Flanagan wrote it, who wrote Midnight Mass.
Yes.
And Usher. I loved Midnight Mass. So I reached out to him and I said, hey, man, I'd love to...
Mike Flanagan?
Mike's his brother. Mike's the director, and James is the writer.
Don't think you're gonna catch Greg.
No, I wasn't-
No. That was a question. By the way, it was your second question.
Okay.
But I really, really loved his writing. I loved the writing in Midnight Mass. I just thought it was fantastic. So I reached out. I said, hey, I'm doing season 4 of Creepshow. Do you have any stories? And he's like, it's not really my medium, man. Sorry, but thanks. And then like 20 minutes later, he calls me back and wait, I got a story. So I cast Samantha Sloyan, who was in Midnight Mass, and it's an excellent, excellent episode called 20 Minutes with Cassandra. This girl comes home from work, walks in, grabs a glass of wine, knock on the door, she opens the door, this woman runs in and goes, you're gonna die in 20 minutes. That's the premise of the episode. Love the episode. Did my first cut, it's like 35 minutes, and the network watched it, and they're like, oh my God, it's so great. But you should cut 10 minutes out. So I'm like, nah. I like it the way it is. I'm very attached to the things that I do. Creatively, when you put your heart and soul into something, which I really do. I really do feel that my heart and my soul and everything, I put it into something. So I get defensive, and someone's like, we should see less of the monster. I'm like, what? Why would we see it's the monster? People want to see the monster. And then I'll cut a few frames. I'm like, yeah, they were right. And then it pisses me off because I realize that I'm very protective creatively what I do.
Rebellious.
I know.
Yeah, but that's good.
But that's a great, you know what? That's a great word, rebellious, because if you really think about the genre that started this whole movement, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Night of the Living Dead, Last House on the Left, Hills Have Eyes, those movies were all rebellious. Those were made by filmmakers that everybody said, nobody wants to see that. Don't make that movie, it's too gory. So that's a perfect word to describe what we do. We're all rebellious. When I was, and by the way, when I was young, and we would go to conventions, like when I was in high school, nobody liked me. Like people thought I was the weird kid who loved horror movies. And Rush and Leonard Skinner. So I would like wear my Leonard Skinner t-shirt, and I would talk about horror movies, and people would be like,
Iron Maiden t-shirt.
I didn't have an Iron Maiden. Oh, he left already. He got his question answered. He's like, I'm done.
Nicotero likes Iron Maiden. I'm going right
He
to Twitter.
literally dropped his mic and left. No, but so many people talk about horror stuff, but when I was younger, it wasn't cool to like horror movies. You would go and there'd be 3 people in the theater, and that was it. So now the fact that it's cool to like horror stuff, and it hasn't become mainstream because we still wear our Black Misfit t-shirts, and we still watch like the goriest shit, and everybody's. You do what?
Gory stuff.
Good. All right. He really wants to talk. We're gonna give you get the next question. So anyway, it's kind of great that art, and it's the passion. So when you were saying the word rebellious, we are rebellious because people tell us you shouldn't like this. Oh, you shouldn't like that because it's gonna screw up your
It's the forbidden
mind.
fruit. It
makes
really
you.
is.
They tell you, oh, you must be screwed up. Somebody said to me once, oh, well, if you watch these movies, it's going to make you violent. You're going to be a criminal. Like, if you watch gory stuff, you're going to do horrible things to people. And my response was, well, if that's the case, then go to prison and show all the inmates Disney movies, and that will rehabilitate all of them. If that's indeed true. You can show them all Caddyshack or Stripes, and then they'll laugh, and then they'll be fine. So I love that we still celebrate this rebellious, gory, crazy stuff that we do.
Do you think it's always going to, because it's very much still like that. Like a lot of the studios are still like, oh, horror movies, blah, blah, blah. It's
Yeah.
like we're the bastard, like redheaded stepchildren of the entire entertainment industry.
Yeah, but
Nothing
then,
against
but you're
redheaded
talking-
stepchildren.
which, by the way, makes no sense, because if you really look at the profit margin of horror movies, you spend very little money. Friday the 13th, Dawn of the Dead, those 2 movies, Dawn of the Dead was made for less than $1 million. And when I was in high school, it had grossed $65 million. So if you think of the profit margin, and that's sort of what happened. Then you have the shysters who went, oh, wait a minute, we can spend no money on a movie and then make a ton of money. That's when you had Mother's Day, My Bloody Valentine, Happy Birthday. Then you had all those copycat movies. There was nobody saying, I have to make Mother's Day. There was nobody that ever said that. There was nobody that ever said, I have to. But they all, My Bloody Valentine. Still a good movie. Prowler, The Burning, all the Savini movies. Those movies were all made just because somebody wanted to cash in. If the movie happened to be good, that's because they hired a filmmaker who was passionate about what he was doing. And they just lucked out. They could have hired, Joe Schmo, and they hired Joe Zito. It was a weird segue. But Joe Zito directed
That was
the
actually a
Power.
great segue.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Well, here's an interesting thing. When it comes to horror movies now and horror movies then, I think that in the 70s and 80s it was just a little bit easier for filmmakers to make their movie, because now a lot of times the studios would have you adhere to this checklist, like you have to have this and you have to have that.
Well, even
You have
more
to
in the
read this
last
order.
2 years. Yeah, but I think because back then most of the successful horror movies were independent.
Right.
So there really wasn't a studio. They would raise the money, and then they would take the movie and then they would sell it. So you take the movie and you sell it. Now, it's so funny. People always want to know, like, did you know The Walking Dead was going to be a huge hit? I said, well, I just waited for everybody else to catch up to me
Amen.
and my love of zombies. Because zombies weren't super popular. the big thing, and George and I had this conversation, I believe that what turned the zombie genre around was first-person shooter video games. Because as soon as you put somebody into a situation where they had a toy gun, and I'm going to stress toy gun, and they would shoot zombies, they were protecting themselves. Then all of a sudden you had this whole new generation of gamers who played video games. And then Resident Evil, House of the Dead were the two big ones.
House of the Dead 2 was one of my favorites.
House of the Dead 2 was one of my favorites. We had in the trailer when we were shooting Spy Kids. In 2000, we were shooting, no, it was Faculty, maybe it was Spy Kids. We had a Sega game in the trailer, and in between
the Dreamcast one with the
setups
Yes.
with the guns.
Yes.
I had to order them from Japan.
Yes.
You want to just bring your chair up here?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. You know, but
you know,
but
your
that's
own friends.
really honestly that's what began the sort of rejuvenation of the zombie genre, because now it wasn't just people who had seen Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead that loved zombie stuff, but now you had a new generation of people. And then Resident Evil came out, the movie, and then you had Shaun of the Dead, great movie, and then you had the Dawn of the Dead remake. So those, and 28 Days Later. Wait, so let me back up. 28 Days Later first, then Resident Evil. Loved the first movie because it was a zombie movie, so I was excited. They were fast, but then Dawn of the Dead remake.
Fast.
I've argued with everybody about it because I was excited about it, but it didn't feel that. I even said to George, it doesn't feel like Dawn of the Dead. He said, you hated it more than I did. I was more angry about the Dawn of the Dead remake than George Romero was, which is funny. And then, of course, Shaun of the Dead, which I felt redeemed all the fast zombie stuff. I thought Simon and Edgar and Nick redeemed themselves. So, cut to, that was 2006. Right?
Yeah.
4, 6, something like that. So then cut to Walking Dead comes out. Now you have this sort of
Well, let's not forget Land of the Dead, baby.
Yeah, yes, which was, I agree. However, I feel like at that point, the roller coaster was already headed up the hill.
Yes.
I really feel. So George re-enters his own genre. But I think at that point, you know, because they tried to sell Walking Dead, you know, HBO was going to buy it at one time, NBC wanted to buy it, everybody wanted to buy it, but nobody knew how to make it. And then that's how I got involved, because Frank Darabont said, I got Greg Nicotero, he's going to do all the zombie stuff. And everyone's like, who the fuck's Greg Nicotero? And he said, oh, he worked for George Romero, and he's done zombie stuff all his career. And so it was interesting because The Walking Dead really was greenlit, I think, completely by accident. They knew the script was great, but I don't think anybody really knew what the show was going to be. The show was about a group of survivals, and that's always what Frank wanted. Frank had wanted to do a zombie project for years, He just said, I just don't know. Even before Walking Dead comic book came out, he said to me, I want to do a zombie show. And it was always about an ensemble piece, because Frank is known for Green Mile, Shawshank Redemption, The Mist. You get a bunch of great characters together and you put them in this backdrop. And that's where Walking Dead came from.
Well, you know, being a fan for so long, one of the ultimate things that blew my mind about the last maybe 5 years or so is, if you would have told me in 2000 that The Walking Dead was going to be on TV and it was going to be as gory as it was, I would have laughed at you. So when did gore kind of become acceptable, in your opinion, on regular cable TV? Because it was...
Well, cable's not regulated like traditional broadcast television is. And the irony of all of it is, when we were shooting Land of the Dead, George was so concerned that we were going to get an X or have to go unrated that we shot the gore stuff, but we had one day where we put a green screen up and we had zombies walking left and right, so that if we got into trouble with the ratings board, they could just superimpose a zombie just as the gory piece happened, just in case there was a problem. But the irony is, then we do season 1 of The Walking Dead, and when Emma Bell gets killed, Andrea's sister Amy, which I bit her throat out, that was gorier than most of the stuff that we had done on Land of the Dead. And nobody really, the S&P people were like, zombie stuff? The big note we got was, I think it was episode 4 that I directed, which is the Terminus episode, where everybody's over the troughs, and they go down the trough, and they start slitting the throats. Because Scott Gimple had written that episode, and I just said, wait a minute, like if this is a slaughterhouse, we got to really make it a real slaughterhouse. So I pitched him the idea, and we put it in the script. And that was probably, aside from Glenn, the most horrific thing that we've ever done, because they're going down the line. And I remember the network came back and they're like, oh, the first slit throat, the blood, it's too much. So you got to cut a couple frames out. So then we cut like 10 frames, 12 frames, like half a second. And they're like, okay, it's great. And I went, put them back in. So that's my rebellion. So the editor put them back in. And everyone went, oh my God, it looks great.
Yeah.
The trim you did a good job on the little trim there. I'm like,
So the Walking
so
Dead
much
became
fun.
like a huge juggernaut. I mean, we're finishing up with season 11.
12 years of my, it's a third of my career has been on The Walking Dead. If you really,
And let's hear it for him, because that was so
and ironically, I'm not done, because there's multiple Walking Dead shows, which is interesting, because I think the spin-offs really have a unique opportunity, not only to finish certain character stories, but to tell different perspectives. You know, Tales of the Walking Dead came out, and it really is kind of a result of the webisodes that I had shot when we first started, and Creepshow, because each story is standalone story set in the zombie universe. So, you know, it's interesting.
I seen a question somewhere over there. I'll get to you.
You mentioned
Mrs. Voorhees, yes.
call me Pamela.
Sorry. I didn't know we were on a first name basis.
Do you want to switch seats with Gabe, maybe? No?
You mentioned CGI and practical makeup effects working together earlier with your censor zombies. Do you think that the rise of CG has harmed practical makeup effects in the industry?
Well, you know,
Great
that's
question.
a great question. So I do feel that, like, in the late 90s, for about 10 years, it was the new thing on the block. Everybody wanted to do digital. So it swung really far that way. But I feel
And
like...
fast, too.
Fast.
Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of the filmmakers that are coming on the scene now really, who cut their teeth watching movies like Evil Dead 2 and American Werewolf in London and The Howling and The Thing, it's sort of swinging the other way. Now, unfortunately, it's cheaper to do,
Not you.
well, it's not even the union thing. It's a matter of, like, a lot of filmmakers can be like, oh, just shoot them in front of green and we'll just figure it out later. Like, it's cheaper. You don't have to have art department, you don't have to have set dressing. You just need an actor, and a costume, and a green screen or a blue screen.
It's also a little faster, too, because if you blow a headshot, there's a lot of prepping the set, you know?
Yes, but it doesn't look as good.
I'm no advocate for digital.
I mean,
just
look,
let you know.
I'm not a Marvel guy. I think I watched one of the Endgame movies on the airplane and tried to walk out, but it was 35,000 feet. So it's just not my thing. Those look like video games to me. It doesn't feel real. The audience knows when it's real. The audience knows if it's real or not. You know, Creepshow, the nice thing about the Creepshow series is we do the majority of it practically. We did a giant 12-foot werewolf puppet for an episode that I directed called Shapeshifters Anonymous. And when you see it on set, what we do is you take visual effects and you erase the rods. So we built a ceiling on the set, and the puppeteers were above the ceiling, moving the werewolf head and opening and closing the mouth, and the whole thing was rearing up and the arms are moving, and it looked so great. And then the CGI guys went in and went and just erased the rods. So you had a practical puppet there that just looked more real than you could ever get. So, you know, look, visual effects makeup effects, practical stuff, everything has its place. It's really about how the filmmaker chooses. I always use the analogy, it's like, it's a blank canvas. And then my job is to use the right tool. Sometimes you need a palette knife, sometimes you need paint, sometimes you need a brush. Ultimately, you want to paint a great picture. And sometimes you just have to figure out which tool you use. And sometimes it's all visual effects, and sometimes it's all practical, but it's really the filmmaker's how he manipulates the tools to tell the best story.
There's a question back there.
Yeah. You get a time machine, you get to go back and work on any film you want. What do you pick?
That's my question. We used to play that game at K&B when we'd be working. If you could, well, first it would be like, what girl would, what actress would you date? It wasn't the word I used, but it had 4 letters in it. So, Creature from the Black Lagoon, probably, just because it was like the first monster suit movie.
To me, that's like the perfect monster suit to this.
It is. So to go back and work on that movie, look, I would probably say Jaws, but Jaws was such a nightmare to film that like you would pick a movie and go, yeah, I'm gonna go back, and then you'd sit there for 7 months and nothing worked, and watching everybody want to like go crazy. Probably not a fun thing to go back and do. But I think Creature from the Black Lagoon would be cool. But if you could, but you have to amend the question. If you could go back in time and work one day on a movie, because seriously, because then I would be like, I want to sit in the animation studio with Ray Harryhausen for a day and watch him animate the skeleton fight scene or something.
Jason and the Argonauts.
Jason and the Argonauts. So there, or just like be a fly on the wall, like when they were shooting the transformation stuff in American Werewolf in London. I think it's more fun because if you go, you can work on any movie. Watching those guys build that shark in Jaws and then have it not work. Like I've been on sets where stuff doesn't work. It crushes your soul when you have everybody standing around and somebody standing on the blood tube and you're like, where's the blood? Where's the blood? And you hear the pop and you look behind you and the entire crew is covered in blood because the back pressure from the fire. And meanwhile the actor's like, where's the blood, stupid? And I'm like, oh, it's
over there.
The whole crew. And the camera guys are pissed because you're like, no, don't worry, you don't have to cover the camera.
But look how good it was.
The blood will never come back here. And then the actor's standing on the tube going, and there's no blood, and he's pissed, and you're not going to say cut because you don't know when the blood's going to come, and you hear the pop, and you turn around, and so it's not fun. So you got to work on a movie that everything worked perfectly, which never happens, by the way.
Ever. So we have time for a few more questions. It's going to be one over here, and I see you back there too. You go, and while she's going, I'm going to look on this side of the room to see if there's any questions over here. So you first.
I want to know what movie, the first horror movie you saw as a kid, and you just were like, wow, I love this. I think I want to do this.
Well, here's the thing. So when I was younger, before VHS or Beta, anybody know Betamax? Before those existed, you could buy these 8-minute Super 8 condensed versions of horror movies.
Yeah, but just
order
scenes,
them
right?
from the Sears catalog. It was 8 minutes, and it was all just the good stuff. House of Frankenstein, Creature of Black Lagoon. So my grandfather, who was a truck driver, he would come home on the weekends, and we would stay at his house, and he would play these movies. They were 8 minutes long, and he'd play it, and it'd get to the end, and we'd go again. And then he would play it in reverse, so the creature would go out of the water and back on the boat. So we would watch them back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So in my head, I thought every horror movie was 8 minutes long. So then I watched Horror of Dracula, which was probably the first real horror movie that I remember seeing. And I'm like, wow, this is long. This is like an hour, this is like 90 minutes. I thought it would be like, oh, Dracula shows up, dead, sun comes up, he's dead, 8 minutes, it's over. So that was my indoctrination. Because again, you couldn't find horror movies, you didn't have cable or DVR or a player. So we would take them out and we would just watch them over and over and over again.
I used to
So that was
love
really
those.
my sort of indoctrination into horror was, so I would watch Frankenstein and all those. I still have all my Super 8 movies. I still have them. When my kids were young, I put, I got my projector out and I played it on the wall and my kids were watching, Godzilla's Revenge and
The giant claw.
Yeah, giant claw. And it was just, and then the giant squid attack from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, all that
How
stuff.
do you get those released for the rest of us to see it?
You can buy, there are people that have them. I think you can go online. It was Castle Films was the name of the company.
Mhm.
You could probably find, because I have a DVD of those movies. And
eBay,
they were-
too.
Yeah, but you don't want to buy the projector because the projectors just chew the film up.
Yeah.
But you could probably find a DVD that had all those Castle films on them. And they were so great. So like in Georgia, like when I have parties, we just put them on in the background and just
Perfect.
let them run.
Perfect.
Great.
You had a question right there.
Yes. First off, thank you for 11 seasons of The Walking Dead.
Thank you. Thank you.
I realize the universes are still going in other areas, but do you think when it's all said and done, and I kind of got a feeling the answer is yes, is this a show that can be brought back down the road?
I would say yes, but I will tell you something really unique about The Walking Dead that people don't talk about very much. And this is from my perspective, who is a creator on the show. The fact that we created a show that resonates with people and has this unique ability, unlike any other show on television. Not Game of Thrones, not Breaking Bad, not American Horror Story, brings people together. It's a communal experience. People that I talk to come up and say, "Oh my God, my mom and my youngest daughter and I watched the show together." Like, it's strange. I don't understand how The Walking Dead tapped into that. But the fact that it spoke to people on so many different levels, where you emotionally connect with material and you want to share that experience with other people. I don't know of any other show that's ever done that. X-Files didn't do it, Star Trek didn't do it, Night Gallery, or Twilight Zone. Those shows that are landmark, groundbreaking shows. Walking Dead did something different. Was that it spoke to people on an emotional level, and it pulled people together in a way where I've had people come up to me and say, "My dad loved the show, he passed away, and every time I watch the show, I feel him with me." That's unbelievable to me. The fact that that's part of my legacy that I leave behind, that's something that I'm so proud of and I'm so grateful for. And that's because you people really responded to the heart of the show. And the actors, it really was a stroke of genius for Frank Darabont to cast Andy Lincoln and John Bernthal and Sarah Wayne Callies and all the people, Norman Reedus, all those people, because it's lightning in a bottle. You put all those people together and they created the DNA of something that had never existed before and will never exist again. I mean, that's something that every single person has come up to me and said, "Thank you for what you do." It's like, well, you helped keep that alive. That organism that we created wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for what you guys do. So that's my legacy, and that's what I'm so proud of. So when people say, "Oh, you're gonna go work on this show or that show," fuck yeah, I'm gonna work on all of them, because it's part of my DNA is in that as well, and I want it to continue in a way that pleases people. When it starts getting shitty, then I'm out. But I don't want it to get shitty, and I'm not gonna let it get shitty.
Well, good news, bad news. Unfortunately, we're out of time. But the good news is
That was the fastest panel I've ever done, by the way.
The what?
That was the fastest panel I've ever done.
It's because we're good.
I know. But nobody left. Oh wait, there's 2 people leaving now.
All right. Jack will be at his table. Feel free to visit. He'll answer your questions there. One more time, ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for Greg Nicotero.
Dude, I know. It just happened. I know. I'm all over that. All right, good.
I'll text you.